So I was doing some reading the other day, bouncing back and forth between the Old Testament and the Book of Mormon, and I noticed this pattern that has just been itching at my brain. It's about how people break bad.
Break bad. You mean like the specific flavor of their rebellion?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the Bible, specifically the Old Testament, when the Israelites go off the rails, it is almost always Baal or Ashtaroth.
Right. It's this very specific foreign idolatry.
They basically import gods from the neighbors.
Yeah.
But then you flip over to the Book of Mormon, and the pattern is totally different. They don't turn to Baal. They don't turn to Ashtaroth.
Which makes sense. You don't really see those names pop up in the New World setting.
No, you don't. But they do keep doing the exact same specific bad things over and over again.
For like 1,000 years.
Exactly. It's almost like there's a script they're following.
Eh?
You've got people demanding kings, people obsessed with expensive clothes, people setting up very specific types of churches.
Mhm.
And I couldn't quite put my finger on why that script exists, why these specific sins and not others.
That is a really keen observation, and you're right. It isn't random rebellion. It's not just people being wicked. It is a structured, recurring system.
So why does the script exist?
To understand that we have to look at the neighborhood,
The neighborhood?
we have to look at where they were living, and that is what this deep dive is all about. We are unpacking a fascinating piece of research titled The Cultural Context of Nephite Apostasy.
By Mark Allen Wright and Brant Gardner Wright.
Yes. And the mission here, for you listening, is pretty cool. We're going to look at the idea that the bad guys in the Book of Mormon, the Nehors, the Amlicites, the Kingmen, they weren't just making stuff up.
They were essentially trying to merge their religion with the very sophisticated, very dominant culture of their Mesoamerican neighbors.
That's it. It's a concept anthropologists call syncretism.
Syncretism. Okay, let's anchor that term before we get too deep because it sounds a bit academic. What are we actually talking about here?
So syncretism is what happens when you have two different religious or cultural systems bumping into each other. You don't just swap one for the other.
You don't just abandon your faith completely.
Right, you blend them. You try to synchronize them.
Okay, so it's not a hostile takeover, it's a merger.
Exactly. Imagine the Nephites as this smaller group. They have their own distinct religious tradition with the law of Moses, the brass, pleats this belief in a coming Messiah.
Yeah.
But they are living in the middle of these massive, ancient, sophisticated civilizations, what we would historically identify as the Maya interaction sphere.
So you've got the cool kids next door. They have the giant pyramids, the fancy trade routes, the complex calendar systems.
Yeah.
And the Nephites are what? Living in the suburbs.
Essentially, yes. The Nephites are the minority culture. And the pressure isn't necessarily to stop being Nephite. The pressure is to be Nephite plus, to fit in,
To be successful.
to adopt the social hierarchies that seem to be working so well for everyone else.
And that's where this article really shines for me. It argues that when we look at the text through that lens, through the lens of Mesoamerican culture, things like the Order of the Nehors or this obsession with having a king suddenly stop looking like generic wickedness.
Right, they start looking like a very specific form of cultural envy. It changes the whole texture of the conflict. It's not just good versus evil. It's one culture fighting to survive against the gravitational pull of another.
Well, let's jump into the specifics. You mentioned the Order of the Nehors. I think most of us know the name Nehor. He's the guy who kills Gideon in Alma chapter 1.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't really realize it was considered an order.
Yes, and that is a crucial distinction the authors make. Mormon, as the editor of the book, actually uses that phrase. He identifies an order of the Nehors.
Which implies this wasn't just one charismatic guy with some bad idea.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It was a rival value system that survived long after Nehor himself was executed.
It's like a political party or a philosophical movement.
Exactly. And if you look at the text specifically in Alma chapter 1 and referencing back to Jacob chapter 2, you get a checklist of what this order believed. And it's not random.
It is entirely designed to clash with Nephite egalitarianism.
Yes.
Okay, let's run down the checklist. The first one is the theology itself, universal salvation. Nehor teaches that all men should be saved.
Eat, drink, and be merry, right? It sounds lovely on the surface. No need to fear, no need to tremble. God created everyone, so God will redeem everyone.
Which to a modern ear actually sounds kind of nice. It's very inclusive.
It does sound nice. But think about the implication. If everyone is saved automatically, you don't need a savior. You don't need an atonement. And most importantly, for the cultural context, you don't need to change. You don't need to be different from your neighbors.
Wow, that completely removes the friction.
Yeah.
You can live exactly like the Maya next door and still go to the Nephite heaven.
Exactly. And that leads to the second trait, which is priestcraft. The idea that priests should be popular and supported by the people not laboring with their hands.
This is a direct shot at the way the Nephite prophets did things, isn't it? I'm thinking of King Benjamin working in the fields or Alma earning his own living.
It is a direct rejection of that egalitarian ideal. In the broader Mesoamerican world, the priestly class was elite. They were the aristocracy.
They didn't farm?
No, they performed rituals. They were supported by the community because they were seen as essential intermediaries with the gods.
So Nehor is essentially saying, look at us. Why are our leaders sweating in the dirt? It's embarrassing. We should be like the neighbors. Our priests should be elites.
And if your priests are elites, then you need to look the part. Which brings us to the third trait, and this is the one that shows up constantly in the text, costly apparel.
I have to admit, I usually glaze over that phrase. I just think, okay, they bought nice clothes, they were vain.
We all do. We think of it as just vanity. But the authors point out that in the ancient world, and specifically in Mesoamerica, clothing wasn't just fashion, it was communication.
And it was strictly regulated, right? Like you couldn't just wear whatever you wanted.
No way. Your clothing defined your social hierarchy. If you wore certain jade ornaments, certain quetzal feathers, certain woven textiles, you were signaling your rank. You were telling everyone, I am above you.
So when the Book of Mormon mentions apostates wearing costly apparel, they aren't just being trendy. They're trying to establish a class system.
Yes, it was a visual declaration that we are not all equal. And think about the economic pressure for a second.
Okay.
If you are a Nephite merchant and you want to do business with the wealthy city-state down the road, you can't show up looking like a peasant farmer. You need to signal that you belong to the elite class.
It's the ancient equivalent of dress for the job you want. But the job is ruling elite, and the cost is your religion.
That is the pull of syncretism right there. You adopt the external markers of success from the dominant culture, the clothes, the money, the hierarchy, and eventually you have to adopt their worldview to justify it.
Okay, so I get the social and economic pressure. That totally makes sense. But here's where I get stuck. The theology. The Nephites were monotheistic, one God in the law of Moses. The Mesoamerican cultures were polytheistic. Lots of gods, complex pantheons. How do you bridge that gap? It feels like mixing oil and water.
You would think so. But the authors explained that there was actually a very convenient backdoor in Maya theology that made this blending much easier than we might expect. It has to do with something scholars call the deity complex.
The deity complex. It sounds like a psychological disorder, but I assume we're talking about something else?
Right, not a psychological complex. It refers to the complexity of the gods themselves. For the Maya gods weren't always these static, distinct individuals like we think of in Greek mythology where Zeus is Zeus and Apollo is Apollo.
Okay, so how did it work then?
In Mesoamerica, a single god could have multiple manifestations. You might have a deity that is a sun god by day, but transforms into a maize god by night. Or a god that has a young aspect and an old aspect.
Oh, I see.
They had different names, different roles, but they were understood to share the same underlying essence.
I think I see where you're going with this. Because the Nephites also had many names for their god.
Exactly. Think about the list. The Messiah, the Creator, the Shepherd, the Rock, the Son, the Father. To a faithful Nephite, these are titles for Jesus Christ.
But imagine a Nephite who is looking to syncretize someone who wants to make peace with the local religion.
He looks at that list and says, hey, our God has many forms. Your God has many forms. Maybe they are just...
Same thing.
Maybe we are just talking about different facets of the same diamond. It's a slippery slope. You start by using the vocabulary of the dominant culture to explain your own beliefs, and before you know it, you've merged them.
Do we have examples of that vocabulary in the text?
We do. The authors point to the concept of Flower Mountain. This is a widespread Mesoamerican belief in a solar paradise, a beautiful flower-filled mountain where the ancestors go connected to the sun.
And the Book of Mormon has a ton of solar imagery.
It does. We see phrases about the righteous shining forth or Christ as the King of Heaven who shines forth. The argument is that the apostates could keep using the Nephite vocabulary, talking about shining in heaven, but internally they were shifting the meaning to match the local solar worship.
That is devious. You don't have to throw out your scriptures. You just reinterpret them to fit the neighbor's religion.
And that makes the apostasy much harder to spot, at least at first. It sounds like they're saying the right things, but the definitions have changed.
So you can keep the words,
Yeah.
but you completely change the dictionary.
Numerically.
Let's move to the political side of this.
Right.
Because this theological blending didn't just stay in the synagogue, it spilled out into the streets. And this is the part of the deep dive that really clarified the Book of Alma for me. the conflict between the divine king and the heavenly king.
This is the core conflict of the first half of the Book of Alma. You have the Amlicites following Emlichi, who break away and want to make Emlichi a king.
Yeah.
And you have to ask why.
Right? Because the Nephites had just gotten rid of kings. They had judges. It was a new free system. Why go back?
Was it just because Amlichi was power hungry?
That's what I always assumed.
Yeah.
But why did so many people follow him?
The answer lies in the Mesoamerican concept of kingship. In the Maya world, the ruler, the Kulajah, wasn't just a guy in charge. He was a divine lord.
Divine, like actually a god.
He was seen as the bridge between the natural world and the supernatural world. He performed the rituals that kept the cosmos running. He controlled the rain, the harvest, the war.
So if you don't have a king...
If you don't have a king who is keeping the universe from falling apart, who is acting as the buffer between you and the scary, chaotic forces of the gods...
That sheds a whole new light on King Benjamin's speech back in Mosiah chapter 2. I've read that speech 100 times. He stands up and says, I am not divine. I am a mortal man like you. I always just thought, what a humble guy.
It is humility, but it's also a polemic. He is making a massive theological argument.
How so?
In that cultural context, a king standing up and explicitly saying, I am not divine, is shocking. It's entirely countercultural. He is dismantling the Mesoamerican expectation of kingship. He's saying, I am not the bridge to God. I am just a man.
Because the faithful Nephite view was that the true king is the heavenly king, Jesus Christ.
Precisely. But here is the trade-off, and it's a tough one. The faithful view asks you to wait for a heavenly king who you can't see who is coming in the future.
Right.
The apostate view, the Amlicite view, says, why wait? We can have a divine king right here, right now. Look at Emlichi. He's powerful, he's rich, he can perform the rituals, we can see him.
It's trading the abstract future for the tangible present.
And that is an incredibly powerful temptation. The Amlicites weren't just confused, they were offering a system that felt more real, more immediate, and more secure than the Nephite faith.
Speaking of making things feel real and immediate, we have to talk about the rituals. Because this isn't just about who sits on the throne. It's about what happens in the temple. The source material talks about something called deity concurrence.
Yes. This is one of the most vivid connections the authors make.
Break that down for us. What is deity concurrence?
It's essentially God impersonation, but with extremely high stakes. In Mesoamerican rituals, when a king or a priest put on a mask or a headdress representing a god, it wasn't just play acting.
It wasn't like a Halloween costume.
Not at all. It was believed to be a form of transubstantiation. In the ritual space, the individual became the god. The image of the god was literally upon them. They stepped into the identity of the deity and channeled divine power.
So for the duration of the ritual, that person is the deity.
Correct.
This brings a specific scripture to mind immediately. It's Alma chapter 5. Alma is preaching to the people in Ammonihah and Zaremla who are dealing with all this apostasy, and he asks them a very strange question. He says, have you received his image in your countenances?
And can you look up having the image of God engraven upon your countenances?
I always thought that was just poetic language. Like, do you look happy? Do you look like a Christian?
It is poetic, but in this context, it's likely a very pointed counter-metaphor. Imagine Alma talking to people who see their neighbors, or maybe even their own apostate family members, participating in these flashy rituals where they put on physical masks, physical images of gods to channel power.
So Alma is flipping the script.
He's completely flipping it. He's asking, you want the image of God. You don't get it by painting a mask or carving wood. You get it by having the spiritual image of Christ engraven on your heart and radiating from your face.
That is such a powerful aha moment for me. He's recontextualizing a cultural concept they all understood.
Yeah.
He's saying the true image isn't something you wear, it's something you become through the atonement.
Exactly. He's taking the tangible desire to see God and turning it inward.
But we have to address the darker side of this syncretism. Because these disagreements didn't just end in debates or sermonizing, they ended in civil war. I mean, the Amlicites paint their heads red and attack the Nephites. It gets incredibly violent. Why?
Because in the ancient world, you couldn't separate religion, politics, and economics. They were one holistic worldview. If you changed your religion, you were changing your government and your social structure.
So when the Amlicites wanted a king, they were also implicitly rejecting the system of judges and equality.
Yes. But there is a specific element that likely fueled the violence, something that really emphasizes the difference between the two cultures, and that is the concept of blood.
Blood. Okay, explain. And I feel like I need to brace myself.
In Maya, kingship and ritual blood was the ultimate substance. It was sacred. Kings actually practiced voluntary bloodletting.
Voluntary? You mean they cut themselves on purpose?
Oh, yes. We have art depicting kings piercing their tongues or even their genitals with stingray spines or obsidian blades.
Ouch. That is intense. Why would anyone do that?
It wasn't for pain. It was for power. They did it to contact ancestors and ensure fertility for the land. The king's blood was seen as the substance that kept the universe going. It was atoning in a sense. It maintained the cosmic order.
And then you have the Nephite prophets preaching the atoning blood of Christ.
Right. But look at how Amulet clarifies this in Alma chapter 34. He's talking to the Zoramites, another apostate group, and he specifically argues about the nature of the sacrifice. He says the great and last sacrifice will not be a human sacrifice.
Oh.
And he adds it will not be the blood of a man.
Oh, wow. I always interpreted that as him just saying we aren't sacrificing animals anymore, but you're saying he's countering the idea of the king's blood?
It seems very likely. He is arguing against a specific cultural belief that a human king's blood has atoning or cosmic power. He's saying no man's blood, no king's blood can atone for another, only the blood of God.
That raises the stakes significantly.
It does. It means the conflict between the Nephites and the Amlicites wasn't just a disagreement about doctrine, it was a clash of civilizations. The Amlicites wanted the power, the wealth, the hierarchy, and the rituals of the surrounding culture.
And the egalitarian, judges-led system the Nephites was standing in their way. So when we step back and look at the order of the Nehors, the Amlicites, the Zoramites, they weren't just random villains. They were people trying to synchronize their beliefs with the prestigious hierarchical culture around them.
They wanted the cool clothes, the visible king, the immediate power. They traded the future invisible Christ for a present visible divine king. They traded the promise of equality for the immediate gratification of being elite. It's a tragic trade, but honestly, it's a very human one.
It really makes you reflect on the pressure to conform. For those of you listening, we don't live in Mesoamerica. We aren't tempted to pierce our tongues with stingray spines.
Thankfully.
But we all live in cultures that define what success looks like.
Absolutely.
And sometimes those definitions, wealth, visibility, status, are at odds with our values. The pressure to syncretize is just as strong today.
The pressure to blend in is constant. But I want to leave you with one final thought that I've been mulling over from this research.
Go for it.
We talked about King Benjamin, the good guy par excellence. He had to stand up and explicitly tell his people, I am not a god. He had to remind them, I am mortal.
Right.
If he had to say that, how close were the faithful Nephites to treating him like one?
That's a chilling thought.
It suggests that the good guys weren't immune to this. They were breathing the same cultural air. How close were they to crossing that line just because it was the norm around them? It suggests that fighting this cultural gravity wasn't just a problem for the wicked. It was a constant struggle for the righteous, too.
So the battle wasn't just out on the battlefield against the Amlicites. It was internal.
Always.
That is a provocative thought. It's not just about them. It's about us and what we might be absorbing without even realizing it. Thank you so much for walking us through this. This has been a fascinating deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
And thank you for listening. We will catch you on the next deep dive.